Hello and welcome to the Science Fiction and Fantasy Marketing Podcast, the show where we help you establish your author brand, increase the size of your audience, and sell more books. I'm Lindsay Baroker, and I'm here with Jeffrey Poole and Joe Lalo, and we are recording early this week for you, so apologies if you're out there watching the YouTube video live. Probably nothing is happening for you. I'm heading off to the Caribbean next week on a cruise, and I wasn't going to have internet access, so the guys were good enough to record early with me. So it's just the three of us tonight, and we're going to attempt to keep it short. I say that all the time, and it doesn't usually happen, so we'll see.
Dusty, sorry.
Shouldn't you mute yourself when you do that? Okay. Our topic tonight, we're going to, it's a marketing topic, but we're going to be talking about writing stories that keep readers coming back for more. Because I think we don't talk about craft maybe as much as we should when we talk about the marketing. So much of it, I've talked about in the past, like if you're giving away your book one and nothing's happening and you're actually getting downloads, you need to look at that book maybe because it's not grabbing people. So even though none of us are professional creative writing teachers, which will become apparent as soon as we start talking, we're just going to talk about, touch on a few things that we think are useful to look at, especially if you're not getting maybe the kind of sell-through that you're hoping for with your series, or even if just maybe you're in KU and you're getting borrows but not as many page reads, which might suggest people aren't finishing the book. So yeah, we're going to talk about this. And I would say too that I've mentioned this before, if you're not, we kind of have a split audience. I think we have people that want to do the sell to market, write to trend thing in hope of cashing in, which is nothing wrong with that, especially if you really enjoy the stuff that's popular in the market. But then we also have a lot of people that, as the three of us, I think, are that struggle with that idea. We're just not that into maybe what's trendy or popular, so we just tell the stories we want to write. And I feel like if you're going to do that, you probably your craft needs to be a little better, because you're probably going to be giving away some stuff. People are going to be sampling you. If the story doesn't exactly sound like, oh, this is my type of story, we've talked about before in romance, a lot of people, it seems just from what the publishers pick up, like we want 3 zombie romance novels this month. And even if this other story is better, this is what's selling. So, and I'm kind of rambling about that there, but what do you guys think? Do you feel like if you're not writing to market, maybe you have to be a little better at the craft side?
I would say so, because I remember back when, and not that it hasn't faded, but back when all the the vampires and the werewolf story came out, and that's what was hot, and I had readers tell me, he's like, this is what seems to be popular right now. Are you going to write something like that? I'm like, nope. That's because that I'm not passionate about. I couldn't give a rat's patootie about. I'm going to write what I actually feel like writing there, and hopefully, and most of the time, people like it, but they're my own stories. I don't. To use an analogy, my mom always told me, if everyone goes jumping off the bridge, you're going to do the same thing? I'll be like, no, I'm going to question a few things before I take the leap. So my questions are, I don't like the subject matter, so why the heck should I write a book about it?
Yeah, I think it's an uphill struggle when you're not writing the thing that everyone is buying. So absolutely, especially if you're writing something that is absolutely your own thing, like no one's ever written that before, it's going to have to be really good because it is literally one of a kind, So definitely the further you are from like mainstream marketable, the better you'd better be at not only writing a good story, but like grabbing people quick, especially if you're going to be in KU, because you want to get them to stick around to the end. So I definitely agree that craft is much more important when you're not writing to market.
Right, and as we've said before, it doesn't mean that if you want to write to market and your craft is really strong, there's anything wrong with that. You're probably going to knock it out of the park. That's bonus, But I feel like we've probably all had the experience where you pick up a book because you see it's selling really well and you want to see like, gosh, what is this person doing? And there's like typos and grammatical errors in the sample, and you just can't even believe that people are buying this. And the writing doesn't seem that strong. And it's not, and especially when it's things like that, that's not an opinion. Maybe some people didn't like 50 Shades of Grey and thought the writing was weak, but at least it wasn't full of typos and grammar things and stuff. And a lot of people who kind of analyzed it could say, well, these are some of the reasons why it probably was popular. So I would say there's a difference between the books that you just can't understand why they're selling and the books where you're upset that they're selling because they just don't seem to be up to snuff. But I feel like when you get away from the stuff that's written to trend, if you find something that's selling well, they've done a good job, and there's a really good reason. Unless you be disappointed that you're just not going to do well if you don't write to market. I actually feel, and I've heard some of this up and seen this in forums a couple times with other people saying something similar, is that if you don't write to market and you're working on your craft, you're telling really cool stories that are going to appeal to the people out there that are like you and like what you like, I feel like you're going to build a really loyal fan base that way. Whereas sometimes with the people, it sounds like this is true very much in the romance industry, where the authors can be kind of interchangeable for the readers. They just want this, this, and this to happen. And it's not that they can't appreciate good writing, but I see it a lot where the author will start a new series and people won't follow them over because it's not vampires, or it's not dragon shifters, or whatever is the thing that they picked up the other series for. Whereas I think the three of us have all tried different genres and hopped around a bit and written really different series, and we've been fortunate that we've had loyal readers that have jumped over and read everything we've written. So I think that if you focus on the craft, it's always going to be a good thing, right? It's never a bad thing. But yeah, so let's talk a little bit about some of the things that you could maybe look at in your own writing if things aren't going as well as you're hoping, or some of the things we've seen in books, because sometimes people ask us to take a look at a book and like, why isn't this selling? Is it the cover? Is it the blurb? Sometimes, but sometimes too, you read the first sample and sample pages and they're
the word is cringe.
Yeah, and it's hard you don't want to say anything too, because people are coming to you for advice, but authors, and it depends. Some authors can be great at accepting criticism, but a lot of them that are like that skipped the whole like taking classes, joining workshops process, so they're not used to handling criticism. So that's why I don't like answering that question for people. Even if it's the cover or something fixable.
I found the way around that is I've had other authors as well, like brand new authors. I've gone on record numerous times. I'll say I'll help out other authors and look at your book, but if you want my opinion, I'm going to give it to you. I don't know you. I'm not afraid to hurt your feelings. If you want me to tell you what I find with it, what's wrong with it, I will let you know. And the vast majority of them are like, you know what, hit me with your best shot. I could use constructive criticism, because as you're saying, a lot of times when you have like one of your family members or friends look at the book, they don't want to hurt your feelings. Oh man, it's wonderful, best thing ever. You're going to send 1 million copies of it. And I get the thing is like, the flow of the thing was choppy. I couldn't give a rat's butt about the characters. None of them are relatable. The storyline's not believable. This thing has got like about 5 strikes against it, so I wouldn't go any further than that. But most of the times when you offer critique like that, most of the times the authors will say, "Hey, thanks, I needed to hear that." If you don't have thick skin and you get offended by it, then man alive, you're in the wrong field.
Yeah, it's true, and it's an area where I don't really excel is criticism. Like, I can take criticism, I don't like it, but I need it, and I've said that to the beta readers. It's like, don't just tell me that you thought the book was great. If you did think the book was great, let me know what was great about it, and if you thought there was anything about it that came up short, I need to know. But I'm not great at providing criticism. I've never really been a beta reader for someone else, except for 1 or 2 exceptions. And I don't like giving people bad news. So I'm very much one of those people it's like, well, maybe don't repeat this in every 3rd paragraph. We can trust our reader to I just sugarcoat everything so much that it's not as useful as it might be. But definitely, you have to be criticism. You have to be able to take it and process it, metabolize it, and make nutrients out of it so your writing gets better.
Definitely. And I'd say too, find people that you trust to give criticism. Sometimes readers will write in like after the book is published. I had somebody write me and say like, I didn't really care for book 3, just randomly. And I'm like, dude, I've written 8 books. I'm sorry, I can't go back and change it at this point to make it more to your taste. But if you can find some trusted beta readers, often other authors that write in your genre can be really great, because they're the hardest critics, because they're really picky with what they like, and they've probably studied writing and that sort of thing too. And do it before you publish the book, ideally,
Exactly. I think the funniest critique I ever had. Two reviews right in a row. The first review said, "Man, this book is like too goody two shoes. I mean, nobody's that nice to one another." Very next review, "Man, there's too many swear words in this book. I just couldn't get into it." I'm like, how is that possible to be on the same book at the same time? I mean, I don't know if it's someone just didn't like the story, didn't like the type of humor. I don't know what, but yeah, you get as many people that are unbiased and for you as much as possible to look at it,
All
and then
right.
pay attention to them.
Yes, don't, I'm like Joe too. I don't like receiving criticism, and usually my first reaction is like, oh, whatever. There was nothing wrong with that. But then I tend to like, think about it like, well, maybe I could do this one thing and it would change that and it might be better for it. So try to be open. But just one mistake, we just wrote down some notes of what we've seen, or I did. And I remember this a lot from writing workshops I used to belong to, and I learned so much from that process. It really worked with my type of learning. But you'd see a lot of authors that wrote gorgeous sentences. They were grammatically correct. They were perfect. Even though they're posting them on a workship, you could tell they'd gone over it numerous times.
No
And
squiggles in Word or the word processor.
yeah, and the vocabulary was great. It was, they'd be poetic to a point. And there's nothing wrong with that, but we were kind of joking before the show that you almost never see that with like a really gripping story that pulls you in. The more literary stuff, I think of that stuff as being more appropriate for the literary fiction genre, where people want to just sit there and look at each sentence and admire it. But if you're writing and you find yourself like really laboring over each individual sentence, it might be a sign that you're trying too hard, because that can come across sometimes. When you pick up a thriller or something, they're usually pretty simple sentences and just, moving you through the story quickly. A lot's going on. There's not a lot of description of, especially if places that aren't going to be that important in the plot. I'd see that a lot in the workshop, is that authors are like, I have to set the scene every time we have a new scene, but the characters are only going to be there for 10 minutes and they don't interact with the scene at all. Probably you're fine saying it was a hotel room with chairs and there was a bed. Or just pick like a couple interesting details. I think I've seen this before, and it actually paints a clearer picture in the reader's mind than if you said, you went through and described all the furniture and everything that's in a room, instead say there was a vomit stain in the corner and the potted plant was dead. Boom, I've got a picture of this hotel room that's really classy. So just a thought there on kind of purple prose, as they call it. Do you guys have thoughts or experiences on that?
Yeah, what I usually end up telling my beta readers is as you're reading my story, I work really hard to try and keep the flow and the prose going as smoothly as possible. But if you ever get to a point and all of a sudden you're like, wait, what? And you stop and have to reread a sentence, by all means, jot it down and let me know. I mean, something there isn't flowing the way it should. That I've screwed something up. I've messed up a sentence, something or other, and they'll let me know. Because nothing. If you really, when I'm reading, I actually like to read a book there, and I like to go through it. I don't like to be interrupted for anything. I mean, World War III could happen, and if I'm really been captured by this book, I won't notice it. It's bad, but hey, it happens. I like to read, but yeah. So I tell my beta readers, my posse members, as I call them, that good God Almighty, if something snags the story, something brings you out of it, let me know, because I've messed something up. So that's when I get the nice handy dandy Excel sheet back with like, what the hell, you need to fix this and sort of thing. So. But it works. It helps me out tremendously.
Yeah, my feelings on prose versus compelling stories is like, prose is good for pull quotes and showing off your literary heft, but your goal with a book shouldn't be just to impress people. Like if someone is thinking as they're reading a book, wow, this writer really knows a lot of words, then they're not reading the book. You're taking them out of the book in order to illustrate your ability. But it's the story that keeps the eyes on the page and keeps people coming back. And also, I said this, I think before we started recording, but it can be exhausting to the reader. Like, if you are just constantly slogging through really dense, even if it's beautifully sculpted, if it's really dense text, it's going to start to wear on you. and action and prose do not mix. The shorter sentences, like if you're trying to describe action and you're getting really fancy and prosy, the action is too slow. You're going to have to shorten up those sentences and your smaller words, because you're going to have to, it's like a boxing match that you're trying to write down. It's got to be little short things. There's not going to be giant structures. The way I typically balance the prose thing for myself is I'll handle dense prose. Either I'll set up a paragraph and I'm like, this is the paragraph I want people to quote, and it's worked on more than one occasion where I'm like, just write a 2-paragraph chunk that's a nice little monologue, and then people will quote that. I'm like, yes, I sound smart, and I didn't have to fill the whole book with that. Or I'll do like a paragraph with a punchline, so it'll be like I did this in my sci-fi book, a really dense, just very technical paragraph describing something, and then a 1-sentence paragraph following it that distills it down to a single thought, just to give you an idea, like, this is what I could be saying, this is what I'm going to say instead. Like, that's the way I like to handle prose. Or give all of the really purple prose to one character and have the other characters respond to it accordingly. These are the ways I like to have fun with. Like, if I really, to get it out of my system, those are the ways I'll do it. But everything else I think is better for story.
That's a good way to do it.
If it's a sliding scale of prose to story, then I'd put it as far towards story as I can for most of the time.
You've got me remembering the sitcom Frasier. I don't know if you guys watched that from like 20 years ago.
It's a good one.
He'd say these really pompous things, in his responses, and somebody would say, gosh, you really talk like that. I thought that was just your radio persona.
Exactly.
That was a great show. If you've never seen it, go get the first season. It's a very clever dialogue. So anyway, and also I would say too with the purple prose thing is that you probably don't talk and think like that most of the time. And usually the closer you can get to having your voice be the narrative for the story, the more authentic it feels and the more unique it is, because it's your voice. And that's not to say, like Joe's saying, how you can work it in a little bit. I do that. I'll throw in some alliteration, or, you got a character who actually says something kind of smart that people might want to quote. There's nothing wrong with that. But you usually see with the genre fiction, and maybe epic fantasy can sometimes tend towards the literary a little more. That audience can be pretty forgiving. They happily read 800-page books, book ones. So just know your genre too, know what's going on out there. Urban fantasy, very rarely you're going to find the purple prose. It's tends to be sarcastic, first person kind of stuff. So stay in voice, try to develop your voice too. And that's something that comes with time. It may take a few books before, that's one of the things with the workshops, and why I've seen some authors say they're horrible is that you get so much feedback from people telling you, like, no adverbs, and it just can't end in a preposition, that sometimes it can be kind of harsh. And for a while you may find yourself writing more like other people than yourself. But I think you develop some confidence over time, especially after you make some sales and gain some readers. And then you gradually find your voice out of that. That was my experience anyway with that kind of thing, with the workshop.
Yeah, I've noticed that, especially in my case, my first couple books, I was deliberately I was conscious of like what the stupid computer kept telling me, like, okay, well, you've got the wrong tense of the verb here. You should consider. Well, how does the word say it? You should consider revising this fragment. I'm like, screw you. All right, fine, I'll go ahead and do it. But as the book started progressing and I got more and more into it, I was like, the hell with you. This is the thought I want to convey. I don't care how pretty or neat the thing or ugly the thing is. This is the way I want it to be said. And Word didn't like it, but at that point I didn't care. That's how I wanted to play it. And as long as I stayed consistent to the characters, because I had some characters in my head modeled right after Data, where that's how he talked, a nice, clear, meticulous voice, and others were anything but. So you got to do what you got to convey the conversation or the scene or whatever in your own voice.
Yeah. Plus, if you're able to, like, the less you have to think about how you're phrasing it, the faster you'll write it. I mean, again, if we're going to talk about the marketing, angle, then the faster you can write, the more books you'll be able to put out. So the closer to your own natural voice something is, just the greater word count you're going to achieve in a given day, and the happier you'll be with what you've written. And I have to agree that Word can be kind of pushy, and I've started pushing back against Word. It's gotten to the point where up-to-date versions of Words will say, consider writing more concisely. Like, this could be thus instead of, like, no, that's how that person talks. Stop with the blue underlined, Word.
the best thing Word ever did to me on one of the last books I did, it actually said to me, there are too many mistakes in this book. We're turning off the autocorrect. I'm like, oh, thank God, finally. You tell me where that little option is, I'll turn it off every single time. But
Yeah, fantasy books will do that because you're making up words all the time.
I haven't used Word in about 10 years since I switched to Macs, but I use it to send my document to my editor, but I turned off the grammar check early on when I had it. All right, let's move on and talk about creating characters that people care about, because this is big, especially if you're writing a series. I mean, usually it's the characters, the plot too, but I would say there's a lot of series out there that you just keep reading because you love the characters, especially if you're writing the kind of series where each story is a self-contained story and there's not, you don't have to read 8 books to find out how everything ends. Then you're really relying on the characters to make the reader want to go on and read the next book. So, what makes a sympathetic character? I feel like that's like the question that gets asked a lot and not answered as much as you would think. So characters won't necessarily be unsympathetic when you're reading along, but you just don't care about them. So what makes them sympathetic and what makes you care?
I would say that if you make the character relatable, somebody you can believe in, somebody you can easily, for instance, see yourself, in that role, something that, so it's a character that you actually care about what happens to them. So for instance, if you end the chapter with how these guys are facing down a couple of dragons, like, oh crap, I don't want anything to happen to him. He's a cool character. He knows he did this, he did that. Okay, that keeps him moving to the next page. So when I first started, wasn't really too focused on that. I was more focused on dialogue, and I have since, after listening to a few reviews that tell me that, hey, some character development would be nice, hint, hint, it's like, okay. And now I'd say I've got some fairly relatable characters, and I've got readers all the time saying, when are you going to bring back these characters? I like those guys. I like these guys. So characters you can actually care about is how I answer that.
Yeah, I agree that if you can imagine yourself in the position of the character, then you are instantly more invested in the character, because you're like, man, if I was in that situation, I'd be terrified. And so you start thinking, you start feeling for the character. I think it comes down to flaws and fears for characters. Like if a character, that they're really going to have to fortify, they're really going to have to work hard to achieve in this situation because we've been made aware of their limitations, and this exceeds those limitations. Like that's when you start feeling sympathetic. Like this guy, this girl might not be able to handle this. So when they're flawed and they're going to have to overcome those flaws, and they're experiencing obstacles that you've experienced in your life, like I think those are ways to make a character sympathetic. And to make the character the kind of person you want to like. Like they don't have to be the nicest person, but they have to have redeeming qualities, because especially lately in like movies and TV shows, it's been very popular to make a really sort of just mean guy. Like a jerk is the star of our show, and while they might be entertaining to watch, you don't necessarily want the best things for that character, so I kind of feel like jerk with a heart of gold is where you're going to go if you're going to go jerk, because you want your people to ultimately want this person to succeed. So someone flawed, someone who has the same fears as the reader might have, and someone who the reader hopes the best for I think is the sympathetic character formula for me.
Yeah, the last thing you want is your readers to go, dude, I can't wait for this guy to bite it. Maybe he'll get eaten by a dragon or toasted by this, or like
exactly.
Now I'm thinking of the show House. I think he was kind of an asshole, but
almost
he had all these
unredeemable
reasons.
Yeah,
like he was in pain all the time. I didn't watch that much of it, but he had something going on, and so it is possible to make a character that's kind of an ass, but having people like him. And like you're saying, I think just don't be afraid to show the vulnerabilities of the character. That's what makes them human and what makes us like them. So many early authors will do the Mary Sue character, which is basically your character's beautiful, she's intelligent, she's the captain of whatever the cheerleading squad, whatever the fantasy equivalent would be of that, the captain of the dragon slaying squad. And sometimes when you're reading, you actually get annoyed with this character. You're just like, geez, really? Everything, they're so perfect, it's irritating.
I'd love to see Mary Sue trip and fall in the mud. So.
Right. Whereas if and it's okay, especially I think in sci-fi and fantasy, we want those larger than life heroes. I mean, some readers do read for like the everyday, the hobbits kind of characters, but I don't know about you, when I was reading Lord of the Rings, I was completely bored until Strider shows up. I'm like, finally, a badass character. So I've always enjoyed reading the heroic, the characters that get to do things that you cannot do, the Jedis or the wizards or whatever you have. And I feel like that's a big part of the genres. So that feel free to make them awesome. But then you have kryptonite over here, something that is weighing them down, is making it hard. It makes it so you're not sure they're going to come out on top in every situation. And it's not just that adds conflict, which is good, but it also helps a reader identify because of the vulnerabilities, the commonalities. And also sometimes the reader gets to think things like, oh, this guy is super powerful and awesome, but I'm smarter than him because he did this stupid thing. Well, don't make your characters too stupid. That's another, the too stupid to live thing comes up a lot in criticisms. But it's okay for them to, let me use the word Costigan books by Bujold. I love those books. The main character, Miles, super smart, super bright, always getting himself in trouble. And there's one book later in the series where he kind of has this choice where if he says what happens, he's going to get in trouble. And if he hides it, but then they find out later he's going to lose his career, and he hides it and does, sorry, spoilers, he does the thing that you're just like, oh God, don't do that thing. But you can totally, there's 10 books to back up why he would do it. You totally understand why he makes that choice. But yes, make your really great, smart, powerful characters have flaws and be vulnerable. And
have you seen that TV show, Lucifer, I think it is? It's something like that where literally it's Lucifer and he's trying to be a little bit good. So you're like, okay, this is a bad guy. Where oddly enough, we want to root for him, but he's still, you can tell he's not all perfect. So yeah, it's a good show. It's renewed actually, so check it out.
Yeah.
all right.
I have to agree with the when the story will not be interesting if there is no doubt at all that your hero is going to succeed. Like, obviously, most stories are written such that the hero can succeed, but if you have Superman in your story and no one else has superpowers and there is no kryptonite, then where the heck is the interest going to come from? We know that he is going to succeed, so you might as well just skip to the end and see how it happened. Yeah. I think that, like, if we're talking about making a compelling story, part of the compelling story is the doubt and uncertainty, and you don't have doubt and uncertainty with a perfect character.
Yeah, there's got to be a chance that the perfect character, the character can fail. You need an antagonist on the same level as the protagonist.
Yeah, although apparently, and it's been pointed out many times, the one exception to this rule seems to be Mary Poppins. Mary Poppins is literally practically perfect in every way, but still makes for an enjoyable film.
Yeah, fine. We're not talking about Disney, though.
It must be the singing. If the songs are good, they'll forgive you. It's kind of hard to do that in text, though.
Yeah. Actually, I found out from my editor that I can't even use lyrics in my text. Like, they'll come after you. Like, ooh, okay, I have to describe the lyrics now.
Yes, it's very sad. Since I write far future space opera and far somewhere else fantasy, I've never that tempted, but I've been tempted to use them lyrics like a piece for a title before. And you're like, it has to be something that's small enough that it's lots of places, it's not
in common use.
Yeah. All right. My last thought on characters, and I actually remember, thank you, Mrs. Myler from 10th grade English. For some reason, I remember she gave us a sheet, and one of the things on it was like, how do you know who the main character is, or how is it a good main character? And one of the rules was that the person either has to change and grow as a result of the book or cause others to change and grow. So that may be one of the things, like if your readers are saying, oh, not enough character development, that's probably what they mean, is if they're the same person at the beginning of the story as they were at the end of the story. I have no idea what that says, Jeff.
It's true. That's actually an embarrassingly recent discovery for me. Like, obviously, just the nature of the story is such that my characters would grow and change, but it's not until recently that I sort of started thinking specifically, I need to have a character arc. I need to have this character starts this way and ends this way. You can see in some of my characters don't have a character arc. Their character arc is the plot of the story, but they start and end the same way. And the more you can change the character and show that the story has affected them, particularly in a long-running series, definitely the more compelling the character and the series will be.
Right, and it can be tough if you're doing a series like something like the Dresden Files, or something where they're a PI, or something where it's not a big epic world-changing thing that's happening in each book, and here you are 10 books into the series. And that's where maybe you look at the rule and it's can cause other people to change and grow too. Not that we would hope over a 10-book series that things would happen. Maybe your character gets married or goes back to school, whatever makes sense for your setting. So even though in real life they always say people never change, but it's something we want in our fiction. It's satisfying to see a character start as one thing and hopefully end in a better place. And maybe and that's one of the tropes in fantasy, right, is you often start with the orphan boy who knows nothing, and then by the end he's the powerful wizard that saves the world. And he's not just growing in power, he's learning things along the way, and you've got the mentor characters. And maybe that's why the genre is satisfying in that regard, is that you don't always get that nice little character growth to happen in real life.
Yeah. Me personally, I make sure that between my fantasy novels, especially the Tales of Lantari series, that I always have like a year or two that happens between novels, and I start, as I'm plotting out the book, I'm like, it's been a couple of years. What would conceivably happen? Okay, well, this guy should get, his power should be more controllable, so he should be able to do this, he should be able to do that. I don't necessarily have to explain it in every single book. It's just that the reader's like, okay, it's a given. Time's passing. He's getting better. This person's getting worse. I mean, it's a good way. I always use time passing to be able to control the character development as well.
Yeah, and I think one of the things particularly that it shows off when a series is maybe starting to reach its conclusion is, let's say you have a character he's got a drinking problem, and then in book 4 he finally beats the drinking problem, and then in book 6 he has a relapse, and then in book 8 he beats the drinking problem again. And then in book 12, he has another relapse. Once you have the second relapse, I think it's probably time to wind down the series or choose a different direction for the character. And I've seen it happen in 2 different series. I forget, one of them was a mystery series where Dave Robichaud is the character, and he has like 4 relapses over the course of the series. It's starting to show its age. So I think that's one way to find out whether your series is getting some gray hairs.
I'd be expecting like, okay, book 12, he's on second relapse. Book 13, his ass gets thrown into into rehab or something. But.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but we'll fully admit that it's hard when you're doing a series sometimes, and it's hard to remember all these rules. I'm actually much better when I'm writing a short story. Like a short story, there has to be a point. There's like had to be a point to telling it. Sometimes with a series, you're just like, well, I'm just telling the next adventure, and as the plot goes on, and it can be harder to remember things like, oh, character should grow, and keeping it all in there. But it's funny, when I look back at the books I consider my best books, like, oh yeah, I kind of did all the things you're supposed to do. Imagine that, and it worked. So something to think about when you're plotting, especially if you're somebody like me and your plots, if you plot, are just kind of chronological events happening. It's probably a good idea. I know Libby Hawker has a book on outlining, and she goes about it a different way, where it's the character's journey is actually sort of the outline basis for the book. So at the least maybe put some of those points into your outline to remember to hit them. They have this conversation in chapter 4, and deep things are revealed, and secret meaning of life, and suddenly it's clear. Whatever you're writing, that it makes sense for. And it doesn't have to be a huge change. Overcoming alcoholism totally sounds legitimate. 4 times, probably real life, probably how it works. But yeah. All right. Any final thoughts on character?
I don't think so. Not for me, anyways.
I think we hit the points.
All right. So let's just talk a little bit about conflict and the importance of having external and internal conflict. So I feel like this is another thing when I pick up people's books or I've read them in the workshop. Things are happening, but you don't care that they happen, or they're not happening. And I don't know if this comes from kind of a lot of us fantasy and sci-fi people who grew up playing like role-playing games, Dungeons and Dragons and that kind of thing, and just like, oh, surprise, kobolds come out and attack the party, and it has nothing to do with the plot. So it's conflict, yes, but it's cheap conflict, and it's usually not very satisfying, as if, at least if the big bad is the one throwing the enemies out there and you have to deal with them. That's good. But I would say be careful of just throwing in conflict that doesn't really have to do with what your characters are trying to get to, the overall plot. And I know it's tempting when your guys are just hanging out at the inn and nothing, you just don't have anything big scheduled to happen in the plot next. And maybe you need to kind of rework the outline and get things moving along quicker. Maybe you don't need that night at the inn. I don't know. But I feel like in fantasy, we're particularly a little bad about just because we do these slow journeys. Is epic fantasy in particular, where you're crossing a continent. Oh, David Eddings, I loved your books, but crossing, they're just on horses forever and ever and ever and talking. And usually you can cut a lot of that out.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm all for conflict, both external and internal. Keep it pertinent. You can't, as you're saying, you can't just introduce a situation because it has nothing to do with the rest of the story. Just because you need, I always call it in my head filler material. I mean, I've got the points I need to cover in the chapter, but I'm going to be like 4 or 5 pages below where I'd like to be. Let's see. Can I throw in a little bit of humor? Can I throw in here? What happens if I deviate the plot a little bit and have them do this instead of that? I mean, that would open them up for this. I mean, keep it pertinent, and I would say you can definitely get away with it. Conflict keeps the story interesting.
Yeah, it's one of those where I think one of the few things I make sure of when I'm starting to like plan a setting or plan a plot is to make sure there is the capacity for a sudden conflict, like that makes sense. Like if you in the first couple of scenes establish, let's say your character had some run-ins with the mob, and now at any given time when you feel like your story is dragging and could use a little pickup, you can have him encounter a mobster in the area, and it's like, okay, that was established earlier, that would happen, and now he has to deal with it, and how does that complicate the future? It's almost like every piece of conflict should have 3 parts: the where it came from, the conflict itself, and then the impact it has on the rest of the story. And if you take the conflict out and you don't notice that it's missing, chances are it didn't have all 3 of those parts. So it's like that's I agree, it can't be random. It has to make sense in the story. And I remember I was listening to there was a added features for 28 Days Later, in which he basically describes the original plot of the book of the movie. And it's funny where he'll be like, and then at around the 20-minute mark, there'll be another zombie attack just to break things up. And it's like, okay, you can do that. It's a zombie movie. But it's hilarious how much of a throwaway it is, where it's like, yes, we needed conflict here, but even that was to break up the character conflict. You talk about, internal versus external conflict. There can be a time. Let's say you have that night at the inn, and it feels like it's getting a little slow. The conflict could be, well, now for the first time in too long, your character's alone with his thoughts, and he has to sort of deal with the stuff that he's been able to push aside because of much more pressing concerns. Like that's a thing you can do, but it should always definitely come from and go to somewhere, or it's not a part of the story.
Right, and maybe you can use those kobolds if you set them up, like you were saying. And I've been guilty of this. I just did this with the last book that I put in the story bundle. I had like desert space pirates come out of nowhere, and my beta readers are like, "What the hell is this? What do these have to do with this story?" And I'm like, I have to make it at least 50,000 words, or I can't call it a novel. And I said I'd write a novel. So, but they're still there, but I kind of worked it in that the guy sent them. And so we all have the struggles. And,
Yeah.
I think it's important to have some conflict like that. And often the external conflict can be a catalyst in order to get some internal conflict or character growth, or it can be what causes the characters to have a conversation and realize some things about themselves and each other. So if your whole book isn't just this introspective navel gazing, I think in genre fiction, it's really nice if you can get a good blend of that kind of thing. I recently had an email actually from a male reader. I don't know that he was older, but just from his name, I kind of guessed he was from an older generation. And he said, I really like that you have the character moments, the quiet character moments in between all the action. And he's like, that's kind of rare. I was like, well, that's sad. Reading sci-fi, and maybe maybe that's true. And I don't know if that's true, but I've found it rare in movies a lot lately. I wanted to love so many of the, I like action adventure movies, but you got to have some fun dialogue and some character moments where you actually get to care about these people. Otherwise, you're just staring at the screen and things blowing up and blowing up and blowing up. And it doesn't mean anything. The character conflicts that you have and that are resolved are what kind of add meaning and make the story. You have to remember it's about people in the end, right? It's not just things blowing up.
Yeah, and on the point of sometimes the kobolds can come out of nowhere, it's worth pointing out that in real life, things do sometimes happen randomly. Sometimes you get a flat tire, but even then, maybe you don't have where it comes in, but you still have to go where it goes. It has to have some influence on the outcome, even if it's just a reference afterward. But if it just shows up, it happens, they deal with it, and then they move on, and it may as well not have been there. Yeah. Definitely it was unnecessary and should have been handled better.
Right, and sometimes something I often see in fantasy, I read a lot of fantasy in my workshop, is that you've got this adventuring party. Again, probably the Dungeons and Dragons influence in a lot of us. I don't know how many of us grew up reading Dragonlance and Forgotten Realms, where there was always an adventuring party that had to go fight the orcs or whatever. And there's often there'll be like no conflict between the members of the party, or it's very, light. I loved that. I think Firefly was a good example of a story where he put together this crew of characters that they all work together towards a goal, but you were never sure, like, is Jane going to turn in Simon and River, or and they had fights and they didn't quite get along. And I think one thing that's good to remember when you have a group like that, or an adventuring party, is that everybody has to be there for their own reason, and usually people's reasons are not all the same. So maybe they all want to slay the dragon and get the treasure, but they all want to keep the treasure for themselves, so that's going to create conflict at some point. Or it's just, think about it when you're originally creating your cast. How are these people going to be interesting together? And sometimes that's another thing, that as the series goes on, it can be hard to keep that conflict going, because either these people would have killed each other, or probably they're working together better. And then maybe it's time to introduce some new characters. That often happens as the series go along. All right, any thoughts on that?
My only thought is, like, just because you were talking about an adventuring party, and this is a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. I think it's a very, like, an evidence of being fairly early on in your writing career. Occasionally, like, a D&D player particularly would be guilty of this, is someone basically saying, hey, you want to go on an adventure? And nobody plans to go on an adventure. An adventure is what happens when things don't go according to plan. So I like the phrase, let's go on an adventure, is just sort of not how it works. You know what I mean? So that's a little, like, adventure is the result of conflict, and nobody sets out for conflict, I feel like. So that's one of my, maybe it's arbitrary from my point of view, but that's one of the things I sort of watch out for, is this should have happened to them, as opposed to them planning to go out and have something interesting happen.
Boils down to believability. You've got to be able to say, okay, yeah, that could happen, or else you're going to go like, what? No, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, even in a fantasy setting, it should be the logical result of cause and effect.
So don't just go randomly decide to slay a dragon. You slay the dragon because he killed your father. You've been on the hunt for the six-fingered dragon for your whole life.
Exactly.
There he is, and you got to figure out how to slay him.
The red dragon with a 1 blue scale. There he is.
Or it's got to be the character trait for that character, that he just is a maniac who goes off and does these things. And, like, if it have to, again, relevant to the other characters, like, we don't want him on the team. He runs off and does crazy crap, and that's going to be a problem for all of us.
It's really fun in a D&D game, though, because I was that character. I was always a gnome. I was a gnome or something that was, like,
chaotic neutral,
gathering herbs for my potions, and, like, oh, look, there's a dragon.
I think I feel obligated to go no comprendo.
You were the gnome too, weren't you?
What the hell was I? I've been a gnome a couple times. Dwarf.
All right. Some kind of last thoughts on internal conflict. And this goes back to what we were talking about, making characters that have things they're working through, but I feel like it should be as important, the internal conflict, as whatever they're I have a dog staring up at me with his head in my lap. He agrees, and wants treats. But it should be as important as the external conflict. And I wrote down a quote for our notes because I wanted to be smart and literary, but I actually have this quote, a part of it on my whiteboard that I always keep above my desk, and it's Faulkner, and he said, "The problems of the human heart in conflict with itself, which alone can make good writing because only that is worth writing about, worth the agony and the sweat." I have the shorter version, paraphrased on my board. It's just the human heart in conflict with itself. That's what makes good reading. That has to be, it has to be in your story. And I think that's one of the things when you get the Mary Sue kind of characters, why they're so boring, is they know the answers to everything. They're not trying to figure it out. They're not struggling with anything. But, don't be afraid to tempt your character with evil. And then if he does the right thing in the end, it's all the more powerful because you know he really wanted to rob the bank, whatever it is, and sometimes maybe your character does the wrong thing, and then you have to deal with the repercussions of that. I'm not going to talk about the story. I haven't published yet, but it starts out with that kind of thing. Like, what happens when you start out in chapter 1 screwing up your life or doing something that's going to get you in a lot of trouble? And I feel like it's more interesting when your character too is doing things because they're motivated to do it for some reason than when things are just happening to your character and they're reacting. Those are actually, I feel, really hard to write a story where, because I have one like that where she's kidnapped and she can't really be proactive and protag. That's a word, right? Protagging, because she's kidnapped. But those stories it's really hard. You got to make sure your character is being a protagonist in their life and in the story, and that there's conflict in give him 2 things he wants and what's he going to do.
Yeah, I feel if you make the situation too perfect, the character's too perfect, people will lose interest. If you think you're going along that route, throw a wrench in the works. Let's just see what can happen to ruin their perfect day, and that makes it interesting.
Yeah, I think one source of I think this is sort of the thing you can do to sort of rescue a character that's heading in a Mary Sue direction is like, if let's say this character is perfectly virtuous and will always do the right thing, and then basically it comes along where you're a hero, and the definition of a hero isn't someone who always does the right thing, but who does it what needs to be done. And you would never take another human life, but this person won't stop unless killed. And now it's like, well, are you going to be the hero and do what needs to be done, or are you going to remain perfectly virtuous and never take another life? And you end up with this situation where they have to do one of those 2 things, or choose the third option and find some way to succeed in spite of what would appear to be an insurmountable thing. And like, all that would come from someone who believes themselves to be perfect but exists in an imperfect world. So like, that's like sort of externalizing an internal conflict, sort of.
All right. I feel like we've said a lot. We've kept it under an hour, though, so that's good for us. I don't know. Do you guys want to wrap it up there? Have any final thoughts on just writing stories that people want to read and how that kind of sells itself? It's the best way to sell a book or a series.
Keep your story compelling. Like, make it interesting. Keep your characters. Of course, it might not be human, but keep your characters relatable and human. Just meaning that nobody's perfect. No matter, look around the world today, you're not going to find anyone that's an absolute perfect angel or whatnot. There's always a flaw there. So write a character like that, make it believable, make it relatable, and readers will keep on reading.
I guess my one addition here would be this is the thing I might maybe this is hacky, maybe it's something I'm guilty of, but I find that I can often basically treat the characters in my stories as a cast of actors. And if I'm writing a new story and it doesn't seem like it's going quite right, well, let's cast this character in this story and move the sliders around a little bit. But now let's see how that works. And it's sort of like a shorthand for developing the character appropriate for the story. So like, once you get better at writing characters, you can just peel off a character that'll fit perfectly and people will be interested in. If you're having a hard time and you've written one character successfully, adapting an existing character and having them play that role for a while can sort of help you streamline the character creation process. And I've done it a few times because it's something you can do when you have different series. Is like, well, okay, this character is Desmarais in this story, and this character is Gunnar in this story, and this character is this in this story, and they're sort of the same actor, but they're different because they're in different settings and have different decisions to be made and stuff like that. It's just a little trick that might help you along.
I usually reference two people. Like, I've literally on the side of my monitor, I've got a whole string of yellow notes there. Like, this character, physical appearance, he reminds me of, let's say, this character from this movie or TV show. But his behavior reminds me of this character from this TV show. I mean, like, I've got one character I've got to say, like, for instance, like, I've got the physical looks and appearance like from Benny from The Mummy, for the one with Brendan Fraser in it, and the guy's just smarmy. He's like, you wouldn't trust him with a 10, or you wouldn't want to be around him with a 10-foot pole. It's like, oh, that'd be perfect for him. So every time I reference him, I know, got a picture in my head. This is how I describe him. So it might be helpful.
All right. I would say my final thing there with characters is just, if I'm finding a character's kind of flat and uninteresting, especially a secondary character, sometimes it's just a matter of giving them a couple quirks. Those kind of things will make them stick in the reader's mind. Something, he never sits down when he eats, or, he always drinks these weird concoctions. Whatever, a few little things like that can help. And then also, like we were talking about before, just remembering that everybody is there for their own reasons. They have their own goals. And sometimes when a character's flat, I find it that way. I realize they're kind of just been along for the ride. We haven't seen them for a while trying to exert their influence in shaping the plot, because they're on their own adventure, even though they're maybe not a point of view character. So just some final thoughts there, I guess. And if you create characters, conflict, and well-paced stories that people want to read, you should definitely not have any trouble developing a fan base, even if you're not writing to market. It may take more time. It may take some awesome covers, and sometimes you have to write a blurb that try to pick the couple things that you think in the book that are sort of trendy, whether, assassins, or, if you have a vampire, feel free to highlight those things in the blurb. Any way you can get people to try your book, especially if it's well written, they will not hate you for it. The fact that you highlighted the vampire, even though he's only in 2 chapters of the book. All right, I guess that's about it for us. Thank you for listening. And next week we will be back recording live on YouTube. So feel free to stop by Tuesdays, 6 p.m. Pacific time, 9 p.m. Eastern time.
Sounds like a plan.
Thanks for listening.
All right, take it easy.
So long, everybody.